morning, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome back to the Mobile Chicane, where we consistently get in the way of better motorsport channels. Today we're into our second part of ranking all the 2021 drivers based on their on-track performances alongside those pre-season expectations we had for them. This is the second part, so if you've not seen the first part and before you get all the way through this video thinking, hey, where the heck is Nikita Mazepin? Go back, watch that first part. Spoilers, he's in there quite early on. But anyway, here we are with the top 10 drivers of the year.
Oh, Checo is a legend.
Absolute animal.
Not many, myself included, imagined Perez would be much of a threat to Verstappen this year, and that his signing was to be in the position to battle for third or fourth with Bottas, and offer Red Bull more flexibility in their strategies in more ways than predecessor Alex Albon had been able to offer. From that perspective, Perez met everyone's expectations with his performances throughout the year. There were a number of weekends to forget throughout the year that cost the team some big point-scoring finishes. Spins in Imola, Silverstone and Spa were all a bit careless for race-winning, highly experienced drivers sat in a championship-challenging car. Qualifying was repeatedly his main weakness, and he never seemed to find a solution for those Saturday woes, barring a couple of races where pole looked tantalisingly close, but that he couldn't quite grab. He was frequently off the pace of Verstappen, which was somewhat expected, but the gap between the two, which was up to a second at times, was not, as was his inability to join Verstappen and the Mercedes in the top 4 places, thus always leaving him just out of reach to disrupt the Mercedes' strategies. That said, Perez has always shown that Sunday is where he shines most, and for the vast majority of races, Perez was regularly solid if not spectacular, and was able to overcome his out-of-place grid position with some strong overtaking and excellent tyre management to work his way into the top half of the point scorers. The highlight was undoubtedly that second win in Baku. Whilst it was dropped into his hands after Verstappen's accident, he'd shown strong pace all weekend, and it was only a slow second stop that had cost him the lead on merit. As always, his tyre management had been key to jumping Hamilton, so it would be harsh to say it wasn't well deserved after that. That and a collection of podiums throughout the year, including a run towards the end of the season, most memorably in Mexico, showed that it wasn't all doom and gloom, though crucially he was never able to finish higher than third, his solitary winner side, thus never able to give Max the buffer between himself and Lewis that he desperately would have liked, bar that excellent defence from the Mercedes in Turkey, and we can't possibly forget that astounding performance in Abu Dhabi, which was some of the best laps of racing this year. It was solid, but perhaps not quite as solid as Red Bull would have hoped. Better qualifying and more podiums will be key to ensuring his future with the team.
Number 77, Valtteri Bottas.
We saw some of the absolute best of Bottas in 2021. Turkey was arguably his greatest drive in Formula 1, dominating proceedings in conditions he had previously struggled in and keeping Verstappen at bay the entire race. In Italy, he showed off fine performances in qualifying in the sprint race, and even despite starting at the back with an engine penalty, he masterfully carved his way through to the podium on a weekend when the McLarens in front were on another planet. Monaco was looking strong too, only to suffer a pit stop longer than the Le Mans 24 hours. That's a scientific fact, by the way, not just a joke. But then at other times, we saw the Bottas we've come to know and expect during his time at Mercedes. Fast in practice and qualifying, but inevitably unable to live with the race pace with Hamilton or Verstappen, and settling for third. Like Perez, he was rarely able to climb higher, in Bottas's case the exception being that Turkey win and second in Austria, after Hamilton hit trouble. Unlike Perez though, Bottas was far more consistent in qualifying and much more regularly on the podium, hugely contributing to the Constructors' Championship every time. What was maddeningly frustrating from Bottas was that for all those flashes of brilliance and those consistent drives, was the sheer number of weekends where it all went wrong and he looked all at sea, sandwiched in the midfield and making minimal progress. Emilia-Romagna, Azerbaijan, Russia, USA, Mexico City, it was like we had a totally different driver in the car from the one who had been on pole or the podium just one race before. The cherry on the cake was of course that horrendous error at the start of Hungary that was downright amateurish. It's highly unlikely we'll see a Turkey winning kind of Bottas next year in the Alfa Romeo. The real question is whether we'll see the consistent point scoring operator we've seen at Mercedes and previously at Williams, the completely lost in the midfield Bottas, or perhaps most frustratingly of all, a combination of the two. I for one certainly hope not.
That was a smooth operator!
It was more smooth operation from F1's resident smooth operator, and the close margins in qualifying and the triumph in the final points table between himself and the highly rated Charles Leclerc should not go unnoticed. Before this year, I certainly thought of Sainz as a solid pair of hands, and would perhaps be going to Ferrari to fulfil the dutiful number 2 role, in the way that so many previously did with Michael Schumacher, and I was very happy to be proven wrong. Barring his mistake-ridden weekend in Baku, it was a very solid debut campaign at Ferrari, and the only times he failed to score points in Portugal and France were arguably due to factors out of his control. If you were looking for something to split the difference between himself and Leclerc and to maybe justify why he's not rated higher, it would be that there was arguably some more headline-worthy appearances from the Monegasque driver. Whereas Leclerc was in the hunt for victories at Silverstone and Istanbul and took poles in Monaco and Baku, Sainz never seemed to be in the same position. He was unlucky not to qualify higher in Monaco after Leclerc's late crash, which could have provided a golden opportunity for the victory, and was unlucky that when he did manage to hustle his Ferrari to the front in Russia, he was hotly pursued by an inspired Lando Norris, and he was unfortunate that his overtaking masterclass in Turkey from the back of the grid was overshadowed by his teammates' heroics at the front of the pack. Still, with a brace of podium finishes to his name, his relentless point-scoring capabilities and the very slim margins between himself and Leclerc, if Ferrari have championship contending machinery next year, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better challenger for Leclerc than the man across the garage from him.
Fact. That is true.
Russell has consistently impressed with his performances at Williams since he first made his debut, but I don't think even the most die-hard of George Russell fans, myself included, could have foreseen some of the standout performances from the Brit this year. Where do you even start? As always, he was truly inspired on Saturday afternoons, hustling the Williams into Q2 on a regular basis, and began his new quest to make Q3 as early as the opening rounds in Imola and Portimao, where he was just a tenth away both times. 4 Q3 appearances, 2 of which were top 3 placements, and a clutch of 11th and 12th place finishes in qualifying, were an outstanding return and a car that was at times only faster than the Haas duo. Points were richly deserved from those fantastic qualifying efforts, but it seemed like they were destined to never be collected. They were thrown away by himself with that misjudged overtake at Imola, but also cruelly taken away in both Styria and Austria, through no real fault of his own. Finally though, we had the Hungarian Grand Prix, and after opportunistically attempting to take the lead, dropped back and showed outstanding team spirit as he insisted the team back his teammate Latifi, who was further up the road. The tears in Parc Ferme after that double points finish were one of the more heartwarming moments of the year. The obvious standout was Belgium, where, bar some last-gasp Max Verstappen brilliance, we would have seen one of the most shocking pole positions in F1 history. It was a great shame that we never got to see what could have happened on race day in wet conditions, sandwiched between Verstappen and Hamilton, but that fortuitous podium seemed like a just reward for Russell and the team, in part for all his qualifying heroics and the countless stream of race heartbreaks that had previously befallen him. He never quite hit the same heights after then, bar an outstanding run to third on the grid in Russia. Despite talking up chances of another podium, the repeated issue of a lack of race pace from the Williams meant he dropped back, something he'd suffer with consistently throughout the year. Sometimes it meant minor points, but mostly it sadly meant off-screen anonymity, as he tried his utmost to place the car as high as possible. His opportunity at Mercedes is richly deserved, and I can't wait to see how he continues to grow and shine in 2022.
El plan, Fernando.
Plan. Hay que esperar unos meses.
No one really knew which Alonso we would be getting this year. 2018 Alonso had been fantastic and opportunistic, but after 2 years away, I certainly couldn't help but draw parallels to the return of Michael Schumacher in 2010, and wonder whether we'd see an equally clumsy and overall disappointing return by one of the sport's greatest drivers. As early as round 1, it was clear such worries were completely unfounded. In an off-the-pace Alpine, he'd carved his way up to 7th before deployment issues forced him out. That was the Alonso we saw throughout the majority of 2021. Crafty, opportunistic, and aggressive. The 2 big highlights were obviously Hungary and Qatar. Being tasked with defending from Lewis Hamilton in a midfield best car is not a task that's high on many people's wish lists, but Alonso's 10-lap defence from his old adversary at the Hungaroring, a defence that guaranteed Ocon his maiden victory, was one of the most memorable and fantastic drives of the year. He was equally fantastic in Qatar, grabbing second early on and running well clear of the chasing pack, even after Verstappen passed, resulting in a well-deserved and extremely popular return to the podium. They were the big highlights, but there were countless other occasions, like his start in the British Sprint, when an aggressive start would catapult him from his starting slot up into the points, or some opportunistic moves during chaotic races like Baku or Russia, where he'd display his knack for tactical mastery and racecraft to ensure he'd remain there by race end and continue to rack up a consistent tally of points throughout the year. Perhaps isolated in there was his one weakness of the year, his need to be aggressive on the opening lap to recover into the points because of another disappointing qualifying session. Qualifying struggles reared their head for most of the year, and such struggles prompted some of his weaker races, and there were times where he couldn't match Ocon. Those struggles were particularly prevalent in races such as Monaco, where his lowly qualifying and the tight nature of the circuit meant progress was always going to be limited. He was nearly a second off Ocon in Belgium, which would ultimately cost him any chance of points there, and his struggles in Spain forced an aggressive one-stopper gamble, which failed to come off. Should he solve those qualifying issues for next year, he'll be a solid contender to be best of the rest and chase his 100th podium. And if Alpine really get it right, then who knows?
Pierre Gasly!
The lacking in confidence, error-prone Pierre Gasly that we saw at Red Bull seems a lifetime ago now. In qualifying alone, it was an exceptional year for the Frenchman. Not only was he regularly making the top 10 shootout, but he was rarely outside the top 6, to the point where it stopped being a surprise when he did qualify there, and it was a shock to see him fail to make Q3. Time and time again, the checkered flag would ring out, and there was Gasly, well adrift of the fight at the front that he realistically had no chance of joining, but dominantly clear of the chasing pack. Top 6 finishes in Monaco, Hungary, Holland and Mexico City were big highlights of the year, not to mention another podium in Azerbaijan, where he was unlucky that a mid-race engine issue cost him a place to Vettel, but his robust defence of third from Leclerc made up for that disappointment. And with teammate Tsunoda struggling more often than not, it was Gasly alone who effectively led the charge against Alpine for 5th place in the Constructors, and really it was only some inspired late season that pulled the Enstone rivals clear over AlphaTauri. If you wanted to nitpick, and now that we're into the top 5 drivers of the year, I feel like now is the time to do so, Gasly arguably failed to maximise his results at every single race in a way that the 4 above him did. Qualifying was always exceptional by the Frenchman, but his starts were not always so, and it seemed more often than not that he was shuffled back into the field by the end of the opening lap, which left him open to incidents he otherwise shouldn't have been involved in. The only question mark over Gasly now is what the future holds for him. Whilst he has settled comfortably into the role of team leader at AlphaTauri and can surely be relied upon to deliver a healthy batch of points into the team each year, and with the odd opportunistic podium, both he and the team will know that the World Championship is far out of sight. Opportunities for a re-promotion to Red Bull have come and gone, and I feel like both he and Red Bull know that environment is not the right one for him. There will likely be question marks over the availability of drivers at McLaren if Ricciardo struggles again, or Alpine if Alonso chooses to retire once more, both of which would be attractive propositions for the Frenchman.
I am stupid. I switch off everything.
I was sorely tempted to put Charles at number 1 on this list, and it was only the fact that the 3 above him gave such consistently exceptional performances throughout the year that prevented the Monegasque driver from being any higher. That said, there was rarely a weekend when Charles didn't fully maximise his potential. It seems criminal that I'm sat here recording this and that the season has ended with Leclerc failing to add to his tally of 2 victories, which seems mind-bogglingly low for a driver so highly rated and with so many pole positions to his name already. He fully deserved the win at Silverstone, having taken full advantage of Hamilton and Verstappen's little tango, and it was only an inspired Hamilton that denied him that day. That made his efforts in Turkey, when he so desperately tried to cling on to that win with what would have been a sensational drive, hurt even more. And not forgetting Monaco, and one of the big what-ifs of the year, where he was both guaranteed and denied starting from pole after his late qualifying crash. Would he have won then? Given the highly processional nature of Monaco and barring being passed by Verstappen at the start? Almost certainly. Even when he wasn't putting that Ferrari in places it surely didn't belong, he was still consistently extracting the maximum from it on weekends when the podium places were too far of a stretch. His stunning overtake on Bottas in Spain, or his fourth in the USA where he ran in a league of his own all race, were other shining examples. Of course, it wasn't all perfect, and there were missed opportunities and errors scattered here and there. That previously mentioned Monaco crash was obviously the most notable, but there were times like Austria and Styria where his over-eagerness caused incidents that dropped him back, or his choice not to switch to Inters in Russia was maybe a gamble too far. But on the whole, it was a fine campaign for the Ferrari man, and if the prancing horse can step it up in 2022, that undeservedly low victory record for Leclerc will only shoot upwards.
It's Friday then. It's Saturday, Sunday. What?
If only we were rating drivers based on the first half of the season alone. Lando and McLaren's performances during the opening half of that season were truly sensational and elevated the young Brit's status even further than it had been previously. Not only did he maximise the performance of the McLaren, but he did so while completely dominating teammate Daniel Ricciardo. A few people thought Daniel would have the upper hand over the two, others thought it might be quite evenly matched, but I don't think anyone quite imagined that Norris would be so comprehensively outperforming the Australian. From Bahrain to Britain, it was fantastic performance after fantastic performance. If someone was best of the rest, it was nearly always Norris. He was fairly matched with Ricciardo in qualifying, though there were occasions where he shone there too, at times just a tenth away from the Mercedes or even pole position. And then, come race day, he was so repeatedly the driver of the day. Imola, when he stormed through the pack in the wet to grab his second career podium. Monaco, where he dominated Ricciardo to the point of lapping the Australian, and then defending superbly from Perez for yet another podium. And then the double-header in Austria, where on both occasions he found himself duelling with the Mercedes for the podium, and was rightfully awarded yet another one at the second of the two races. Barring some struggles in Spain, which was mostly due to a knock-on effect from Q1 traffic that wrecked his weekend tyre strategy, Norris was never out of the top 5. Even when the performance of the McLaren dropped off in the second part of the year, he still kept in the scrap for points, and it was a crying shame that it was Ricciardo who took the checkered flag in Italy and not himself, after his superb performances early on, whilst Ricciardo had been floundering. Perhaps the only blots on his record this year are the missed opportunities to take a maiden win, both of which the blame sadly falls squarely at his door. Pole was there for the taking in Belgium after dominating the first two qualifying sessions, but his horror crash there sadly threw that away, and as it turned out, what would have been his debut win. Then there was the heartbreak in Russia, where he had dominated proceedings only for the late rainfall to force him into making the call whether to stay on his dry tyres or not. He gambled wrong, perhaps showing his inexperience in such scenarios. That said, I think it speaks volumes for the development of Lando this year that seeing him run high in the points became less of a surprise as the year went on, and more of an expectation from him, whilst the occasions we saw him battling with Lewis Hamilton on track were more commonplace than unexpected, which must have seemed a complete dream just over 1 year ago. Expectations will be even higher for next year, but if both he and McLaren keep up their rate of development, I have no doubt he'll smash those expectations too.
It's wheel to wheel, Hamilton and Verstappen, and this time Verstappen and Hamilton have crashed out, and they are both out!
It was always going to come down to these two, wasn't it? No matter the exceptional performances from the Norrises, the Leclercs, the Gaslys, it would be impossible to ignore the simply mouth-watering quality of the two drivers who duelled so hard, so fast, so controversially, so on the edge for this year's title. On one hand, you had Max Verstappen, the young gun, the promising young talent who he had heralded as the next big thing for as long as anyone could remember. After previous years filled with crashes, inconsistencies, race-winning but not quite championship-winning machinery, now he was finally in a title-challenging car for the first time in his career, and it was a new challenge with which he took to with aplomb. And on the other hand, you had Lewis Hamilton, arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest F1 driver of all time, not sitting in a car that was a lap and a half ahead of the field for the first time in a very long time, and now under a new intense pressure to fully maximise his results at every round to remain within touching distance of the often quicker Verstappen. And again, here was a driver who took on this new challenge with a renewed relish. As on track with the two this year, deciding who came out on top came down to the thinnest of thin margins, and it's an order that I've honestly dithered back and forth with. Whilst at times their performances verged on near perfection, both diced between the lines of the sublime and the silly as the year went on. Let's look at the good first, shall we? There were times where Max was simply faultless all weekend and romped to victory after victory. Barring a few notable performances, and don't worry, we will get to those notable examples, Max was in superb form week in, week out. It would be easy to gesticulate at the car and say that such performances were easy behind the best Red Bull car in recent years, but having that potential is one matter, realising it is another matter entirely. And Max didn't always have it his own way. There were repeated occasions where he really had to work for his success, with daring overtakes and clever strategies, allowing driver and car to hum in perfect harmony. For all of Max's successes, none though will quite match Lewis's Sao Paulo victory. No, we can't judge one driver's season on a one race alone. We've already decided that when reviewing Messrs Ricciardo and Ocon. But my giddy aunt, what an incredible performance that was, and one that will go down in the history books as one of the most sensational performances in an F1 car. And that race aside, how many occasions did we see Lewis take a car that was second best and make it unbeatable? From the first race in Bahrain, when Verstappen had dominated every single session, somehow, some way, Hamilton was able to make his aggressive strategy work and get to the front, pulling off an unlikely victory. Hamilton so often overcame the superiority of the Red Bull early on with his undeniable talents. Time and time again, he drove the wheels off his Mercedes just to get second place and keep his championship hopes alive. Such pressures maybe took their toll on him at times, and that's when we saw some off days from Hamilton that we'd not really been used to. Monaco was a poor weekend by his high standards, and he never looked competitive, and then in Baku, when a big point swing was there for the taking, a careless driver error forced him off the restart and dropped him to the back. It was a pressure that both drivers felt, and it culminated in incidents aplenty. Sometimes it was clearly the fault of one more than the other, Hamilton at Silverstone or Verstappen in Sao Paulo. But it built a pressure cooker environment and a situation where neither was ever going to back down from the other, to the disastrous consequence in Italy and Saudi Arabia. Indeed, maybe it was those incidents in Sao Paulo and Saudi Arabia that showed the pressure on Verstappen most clearly, and the overly aggressive, too over-the-edge tactics Max had been driven to. Like I said before, when it comes to dividing the two this year, it comes down to the absolute finest of fine margins. I do not believe either driver can be split on outright speed, strategy, or talent. I think both have shown their full merits, both very consistently throughout the year. I think what's most telling about trying to split the two is the fact that every other 19 paragraphs I have written out and assessed for this, but we are in a situation now where I am recording this, and I have not written the end of this because finding a difference between the two is so impossible. The verdict that I'm coming to now is literally coming from my heart and right in this specific situation, because I feel like that's the only way we can fairly assess and find that difference between the two without taking the cop-out option of saying, oh, they were both equally good, they're tied first. Someone has to come out on top. I think what happened in Abu Dhabi leaves a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. And I think based on the instances there, you would say that Hamilton deserved to win the championship and deserves to be on top. But I think for a lot of people, what they forget is that the championship was not based on one lap alone. The championship was based on 22 races throughout the season. And for me, the person who was consistently the best across those 22 races was Max Verstappen. For me, he is a deserving world champion. And for me, that is why he takes the top spot on this list. I think both drivers have been truly exceptional throughout this season, and I am truly excited to see what happens next year. I sincerely hope that we get a fairer and somewhat less controversial series of battles on track, but just to see the two go side to side, wheel by wheel, two drivers at the absolute pinnacle of their careers, pushing each other beyond anything we'd ever seen from the other, was an incredible gift for everyone in the F1 community to see. And I'm just so excited to see what 2022 brings out. Congratulations to Max Verstappen on his championship. Thank you to Lewis Hamilton for his titanic championship battle. And we'll see the two of you again next year.